grateful to be with you on this occasion celebrating the 40th anniversary of my ordination. As Reverend Sundari mentioned in the beginning, introducing the video of my ordination, I was ordained in 1982 by my guru, Roy Eugene Davis, a direct disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda, who brought Kriya Yoga to the West. And along with the beautiful transmission of grace and power that came with my ordination on that day, there were some surprises. If you saw the video, you heard the church bells ringing, and we were meeting in a bank, in a community room that we rented in a local bank. So the bells were not there, but they sounded forth just at the right moment, didn't they? That was lovely. The other surprise was also, as my teacher mentioned, that my ordination was scheduled to take place the day before at a meditation seminar he was offering, but he forgot to do it. And so just imagine, if you will, with me for a moment, it's your day of ordination, and you're waiting all through the day, wondering when that moment is going to come. You know, he's just going to call you up simply like Paramahansa Yogananda called him, you know, kneel down. And so I don't really remember much of that day except wondering, you know, when was it going to occur, until the end of the day, and I realized it was not going to occur. And then, of course, you can imagine the mind, you know, where it goes. Well, I guess he found out about me. Well, you know, wherever the mind goes. But of course, you know, I learned that he had simply forgot. And so that was really good for my ego. And however, I want to say that when he offered the ordination the next day at the Sunday gathering of the newly formed community where I was serving, that was the time, because that became a blessing of my Dharma, of my life work. I was drawn to the mystical path of Kriya Yoga with its philosophy and practices for self and God realization. I wanted that. I wanted that. I wanted to know God. I wanted that direct experience. But I wanted more, if that's possible. Besides a mystical path, I wanted a practical one. I wanted a spiritual path that was non-sectarian, that was universal, and that could be lived, you know, in the family, in the community, in the work world, in the larger global context. I wanted to live an awakened life and contribute to an awakening world. And community is an essential part of that vision. A satsang, you know, where people come together to learn and to practice and to live the spiritual way of life together. That was part of my dream. So when it happened in community, that was exactly right. When Paramahansa Yogananda shared with his guru Sri Yukteswar his reticence about organizations, Sri Yukteswar said to him, "God is the honey, organizations are the hives. Both are necessary." And he added, "Any form is useless, of course, without the spirit. But why shouldn't you start busy hives full of spiritual nectar?" So being ordained in community on that day and having that affirmed for me sort of shined a light on that piece of my dream. And it was an unplanned act of divine grace that has become even more meaningful to me as the years have gone by. With that ordination, I committed myself to God, to the Kriya Yoga path, to my guru, and to you, to spiritual community. The second surprising thing, or the third after the bells and the change of date, the third surprising thing was that my ordination was filmed. Now, today we film the food that we eat. We film where we go and people that we meet and what we buy and how we organize our closets. But 40 years ago, that wasn't a thing. It wasn't happening. And that day, the videographer was someone who was unknown. He was a guy who just showed up. He'd heard my teacher was in town, so he showed up with his video equipment and asked if he could video my teacher's talk. And so that's how it happened that my ordination was filmed. And now, 40 years later, and after the passing of my teacher, to be able to watch, that moment of grace-filled blessing is a gift beyond measure. So those unplanned events, were glimpses, really, of the divine grace that has made everything possible in my life and in this work. It has sustained it, all these decades. And that, I would say the lesson for me of that day was, pay attention, pay attention. Things will not always be the way you thought they were going to be. But know this, you are always being divinely supported. Life is not going to roll out in accordance with your little plan. It is God's life, and it is God's plan, and it will always be greater than what you can ever imagine, because it is infused with divine grace and power. We tend to focus, I think, on the surface things, on our plan, on what we want, what we think should happen, what went wrong, what's missing, what could go wrong, But all the while, life's supportive grace with its power of divine love is there with us, lighting the way forward. If only we open our hearts and our minds to be aware of that. And once we're aware that our life is living with divine purpose, we begin to notice, we begin to suspect that divine grace is everywhere and operating all the time, every day. But without that context of seeing our life as imbued with divine purpose and presence and power, grace can escape us altogether. Many people live, what I would call mundane lives. They're not bad lives, they're just mundane. And they don't experience a world imbued with grace and beauty. But those who are awake, once we're awake, we find it everywhere, regardless of circumstances. We find it everywhere. The poet Mark Nepo wrote, "Today my heart aches, not because something is lacking, but because the love I've carried all along is bursting through the gates of choice." Today my heart aches, not because something is lacking, but because the love I've carried all along is bursting through the gates of choice. Grace, that unmerited, unearned divine support infuses our life. It lifts us, it guides us toward fulfillment of our dharma or our life purpose. It transforms us, it opens our eyes so that we can see grace and beauty and wonder in this life. Here's the thing. Everything truly worthwhile in life comes to us through divine grace. We just really have to think about that. I mean, that's been my experience for 40 years in this work. I hope it is your experience in life. Grace is how we experience higher states of consciousness in meditation. We sit down, we focus our attention, but it's up to divine grace for that revelation that we are seeking to occur. Grace is how we meet our guru. Grace is how we come to the path. Grace is how we're connected with the love of our life, or our best friend, or the children who come into our life. Only through grace does that happen. It's the way wisdom comes to us. It's the light of inspiration. Grace is what supports the earth and its atmosphere. And all things become possible through that divine grace and power. And really, if you think about it, every breath that we take through divine grace. Yoga teaches us that there are 3 kinds of grace. The grace of God, the grace of the Guru, and the grace of self-effort. And that our progress comes about through a combination of those 2, of those 3, but the 2 principally, self-effort and divine grace. Those 2 others are forms of divine grace, through self-effort and divine grace. Self-effort is arranging conditions. It's what we do to become receptive to divine grace. That's what self-effort is. Outwardly, it's arranging conditions in our life, doing the things that we know we should do to live in a spiritually conscious way. Inwardly, self-effort is opening our hearts and purifying our minds to be receptive to grace. The yoga teacher Sri Chinmoy wrote, "Your heart must become a sea of love. Your heart must become a sea of love. Your mind must become a river of detachment." The gratefulness, the cultivation of gratitude is really the way that I see that we have to do that, to open our hearts and to purify our minds, living in this world, living the spiritual life. Gratitude. Gratitude quiets the mind. Notice that. Watch how it works. It stops our restlessness. It stops the ego mind from moving through its litany of complaints. How the ego is always searching for what's wrong, what's out of place, what's missing, what needs to be fixed. It's not possible to continue our fault-finding frenzy along with gratitude. it just can't be done. Try it. You can't. So that doesn't mean, when we cultivate gratitude in that way, it doesn't mean that we don't see error. We don't see where wrong has been done. It doesn't make us blind. It just means that we don't dwell there. It allows us to go deeper, to seek the strength of faith and the ability to see beyond appearances to the activity of grace that allows us to bring forth the healing that's needed. So gratitude opens the heart. Once the ego mind stops complaining and arguing with life, the heart is free to open. This constraint is taken off. And when the mind grows quiet, the splendor of divine love is known. And life is seen as it is, infused with grace and with beauty. So I think gratitude, brings us into the present and into the presence of the one that is our life, that is the life of all. I listen to a podcast sometimes where the host concludes with asking their guest, and the guests are usually spiritual teachers or authors or spiritual practitioners of some kind or another. So that the host asks them in conclusion, what is the one thing they do as they begin their day that they consider indispensable? What is the one thing that they would not skip or miss? I think this is such a good question. And a few of them will say, well, this waking up, getting out of bed, that's what I do religiously. I get out of bed. Or I make my bed before I do anything else. It's an affirmation of getting things done. Or I have my coffee or my tea, or I meditate, or I pray, or I greet my loved ones. There's all different answers. So what would you say is the one thing, first thing, that you feel is non-negotiable? You just will do no matter what. So for me, I always answer the question in my mind. For me, before getting out of bed is prayer. It's a kind of gratitude for being alive, for having another day. It's a sort of affirmation that begins with gratitude, like, wow, okay, here I am, thankful, grateful. Another day. And then some intentionality. I start to focus, and this is just free form for me, but every day, whatever is there, whatever wants to be addressed. But it's something like, may I love well. May I love well. May I be a kind and compassionate and loving human being. May I serve you, Lord, with all my heart and with all my mind. May I be disciplined. May I remember you. And so on, until I feel ready for the day. And then I get out of bed and make it. And that's followed by morning prayers and study and meditation and coffee. Not necessarily in that order. I came across a morning prayer written by His Holiness the Dalai Lama that I want to share with you. It goes like this. Every day, think as you wake up. Today, I am fortunate to have woken up. I'm alive. I have a precious human life. I am not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, to expand my heart to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. I am going to have kind thoughts towards others. I am not going to get angry or think badly about others. I am going to benefit others as much as I can. Life is infused with divine grace and beauty. It is always, forever, as far as I can see, trying to show us that beauty, that grace. We see it when we look upon life with gratitude. Then we are free to see it. Today, I'm grateful to have woken up. Om.